Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Union OnDemand. We're glad that you're here. If we've never met, my name is Brad and I'm one of the teaching pastors here for Union. And our biggest and deepest desire is that you take this teaching, you watch it with a group of friends, maybe a roommate, maybe your small group, and then you work through the questions that are listed below. Because our hope is that you engage life with other people. All right, hey, to start off today, I just want you to do one thing for me. I want you to think of Jesus. So take a second, get a picture of what he looks like in your mind. All right, you got it? Okay, does it look something like this? I hope not. This picture of Jesus, to me at least, just feels kind of creepy. I mean, he's holding one of his vital organs in his hands. Like it just feels, I don't know, a little weird. I don't know that I would want to meet up with this Jesus. So what about this? This is mullet Jesus. Is this the kind of Jesus that you picture? Jesus kind of sitting in a field with some kids. What about this? When you think of Jesus, do you always just picture Jesus up on a cross? Is this what you picture when you think of Jesus? Or maybe this one. It's kind of cartoon Jesus. Jesus is always happy. Jesus is always just frolicking in a meadow. What about this one? Thumbs up Jesus, like cool Jesus. Jesus is always on your side, always happy Jesus. And when it comes to Christianity, who we believe Jesus is and what he's like, it matters. It's important. It defines who we are, and it gives us meaning and peace and direction for how we should live our lives. It gives us purpose and the ability to understand just some of the deeper conflicts and the deeper troubles in our lives. But really, who we say Jesus is and who we say he was, it's kind of only part of the question, isn't it? Because what we're really asking ourselves is, why does it matter? Sure, if we say Jesus was God, like how does that impact my day-to-day life? What does it change in the long run? What does it cost me? I believe that today's teaching is foundational for our faith. I believe that when we can begin to dig in and just take an honest look at who Jesus is and what he really means for our lives, it changes everything. It did for me, and it did for the early disciples as well. In fact, let's just take a look at Matthew chapter 16, where this exact question is asked. Here's what it says in Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 15. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his students, his disciples, "Hey, who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Well, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others maybe Jeremiah or one of the prophets." And then he turns it directly to his students and he asks them, "But what about you? Who do you say that I am?" And that's a question, isn't it? It's a question for us. It's a question for them. Who do you say Jesus is? When I was in college, I was really just exploring my faith, and I had some big questions. And one of the places that I turned was a book by an author named C.S. Lewis. You may have heard of him. He wrote the Chronicle of Narnia series, but he also wrote several books about our faith. And one that just rocked my world was a book called Mere Christianity. And in it, C.S. Lewis argues that often when we look at Jesus as a great teacher, we say things like, yeah, you know what? I don't really buy that Jesus was God or anything, but he had some great moral things to say about life in general. And Lewis just laughs at this idea. He says, Jesus said crazy things. Like, have you read what he said? If you think that he was just a good moral teacher, but not God himself, then you're crazy too. Check this out. This is what C.S. Lewis says. He says, I'm trying here to prevent anyone saying the really foolish thing that people often say about Jesus. I'm ready to accept Jesus as a great moral teacher, but I don't accept his claim to be God. That is the one thing we must not say. A man who is merely man and said the sort of things that Jesus said would not be a great moral teacher. He would be either a lunatic on a level with a man who says, hey, I'm a poached egg, or else he would be the devil of hell. You must make your choice. Either this man was and is the Son of God, or he's a madman, or something worse. You can shut him up as a fool, or you can spit at him and kill him as a demon, or you can fall at his feet and call him Lord and God. But let us not come up with any patronizing nonsense about his being a great human teacher. He has not left that open to us, and he didn't intend to. History has summarized this quote and just said that Jesus was either a liar, a lunatic, or he, in fact, was Lord. We need to decide for ourselves what we believe about him. And over the course of our conversation today, I just want to explore these three ideas. In fact, I want to add one, just one more idea that maybe, who knows, like maybe Jesus didn't even live. Like, what if he's just this made-up story, this fairy tale, this legend? So first up, let's talk about the idea of Jesus being a liar. Was Jesus just a liar? Like we've all done it, right? Like we don't want to, and hopefully we try not to, but everyone has lied. It's a part of life. And hopefully your lies have been short-lived and they've caused minimal damage before you came clean. But some of us, we've just had big lies that have continued to grow and snowball and just become bigger and bigger and heavier and heavier. And if that's you, I just want to say this: the truth matters. The truth matters. There's a number that we're going to throw up on your screen right now. This is our Union texting number. It just comes to our Union staff. If you're in the middle of a lie and it feels so deep and so confusing and you're just having trouble finding your way out of it, please text me. I'd love to grab coffee with you or schedule a Zoom meeting, and we can walk through some ways that we can help unbury you from the lie or just a series of lies. Don't wait. Don't wait until the end of the teaching. Don't wait until tomorrow. Don't wait until next week. Take a second right now and just shoot us a text. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to meet with you, and I'd love to help you take some steps forward. At my house, I have 3 boys at home, and lying, just as a parent, it's something you get pretty good at smelling out. But lies always tend to, kind of no matter what, they have a few things in common. First of all, lies always seem to benefit the liar. It's usually the main motivation for lying, right? Like we're gonna gain something, or we're gonna cover up something else. In some way, it's benefiting the source, benefiting the person telling the lie. But Jesus, he seems to do some weird things that don't really benefit him at all. For example, Jesus does like all of these miracles. Like hundreds, if not thousands of people were healed by Jesus. There are times where huge crowds of people come to Jesus and they were healed. Yet often, when we have a record of one of these healings, Jesus will tell the person to keep it quiet. In fact, here's an example from Matthew chapter 8, verses 1 through 4. It says this: when Jesus came down from the mountainside, large crowds followed him. And a man with leprosy came and he knelt before him and he said, "Lord, if you're willing, you can make me clean." And Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. And he says, I am willing. Be clean. Immediately, he was cleansed of his leprosy. And then here it is. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone. See that you don't tell anyone. We see this happen over and over again. You can check out Mark chapter 1 or Matthew chapter 9 or Matthew chapter 16 or Matthew chapter 18. You'll read similar times where Jesus says to keep things quiet. This seems like the opposite of lying, right? Like if Jesus wanted to benefit from something, why wouldn't he tell people to go all over and let other people know what they have experienced? But what about the things that Jesus does say? How would that benefit him? Like what is his motive there? Well, in Matthew chapter 23, Jesus has a conversation with the religious leaders. And these are like the high up people with all the power and with all the influence and with the ability to change Jesus' life. Like it would benefit Jesus greatly if he was in with this crowd. So what kind of flattering things does he tell them? Well, let's take a look in Matthew chapter 23, verse 13. He says this, woe to you teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Well, it doesn't sound very nice. It doesn't sound very flattering. Well, he says it again in verse 15. He says, woe to you teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. He actually goes on and he says this 7 different times before getting to the end of Matthew 23, where he lands with this gut punch. And he calls them this. He says, you snakes, you brood of vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? So, I don't know. If Jesus was a liar, it just doesn't seem like he was very good at it. The second thing that's pretty universal when it comes to lies is that they always break down when the consequences begin to pile up. Right? Like this is the scene from every true crime documentary when they finally catch the bad guy and then they have him in an interrogation room and they start to lay out all the facts and all the consequences from the actions and they begin to pile up. They break, right? Like they begin to admit the truth. But Jesus, he rides it out to the end. He never changes his story. He never relents and says, okay, yeah, guys, you know what? You're right. You got me. I was just joking. I took it too far. In fact, because of the things that Jesus did and the things that Jesus said in 3 short years, it eventually led to his crucifixion. If he really was a liar, he must have just been crazy. Like, he must have just been nuts. Like, that leads us to C.S. Lewis's second thought. If Jesus wasn't a liar, then he must have been a lunatic. So was he? Was he crazy? Think for just a minute. When you think of crazy, I think sometimes we think of like off the wall, right? Let's set that aside for a second and think of something a little bit more controlled. When we say lunatic, maybe Jesus had a good heart. And maybe he was loving and a compassionate person, but maybe like somehow throughout the course of his life, he just began to believe and think that he was God. Maybe as he was growing up, his mom just shared with him the things that she believed about him. And all of a sudden he started to take these in and believe that he was here to save humanity, that he wasn't purposefully deceiving people, but somewhere along the lines, he began deceiving himself. Like he really just started to believe that he was God. Well, after hearing Jesus speak in front of crowds, other people began to think that maybe he was actually a little bit crazy. In fact, check this out in John chapter 10. It says this in verse 20. Many of them said, he is demon-possessed and raving mad. Why even listen to this guy? Even his own family had some of these same questions. Take a look at this one in Mark chapter 3. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, he is out of his mind. He's out of his mind. So was he? Was he out of his mind? Jesus is quoted as saying things that like we should follow him, and when we do, we need to be prepared to take up our cross, or in other words, we need to be prepared to die for him every day. We should eat his flesh and drink his blood. We should love people who are our enemies. We should talk to an invisible God because that God cares about us. We should love the poor and share our stuff with them. These things sound kind of off the wall. They sound pretty crazy, right? Well, let's take a look at what other people thought of Jesus. There's this one profound story where Jesus was a young boy. He's 12 years old. And his family travels to the temple in Jerusalem for a religious holiday. And at the end, the family turns around, they head back home, and they accidentally, they forgot Jesus. Probably not the best parenting moment for Mary and Joseph, right? But it turns out when they finally realized that Jesus was missing, they turned around and they head back to Jerusalem. But it took them a little while. Jesus had been hanging out there by himself at the age of 12 for 4 days. While he was there, he was hanging out in the temple and he was talking with the religious scholars, and they were blown away by his knowledge and his wisdom and his ability to navigate the scriptures. Later in his life, the religious scholars, they didn't like him. They thought that he was degrading or hurting the religion and their spiritual practices. But did they think that he was crazy? No, they didn't. In fact, they were afraid of him because he was so smart and he was so wise. They tried and couldn't even compete with his ability to share insight and to share wisdom. Now, I'm not a counselor or a professional, but from what I've read, when we take the words and the actions of Jesus during his life as a whole, it doesn't fit into any category of established mental illness. So if he's not a liar and he's not a lunatic, maybe there's a possibility that Jesus was just a legend. What if that's the fact? What if that's the case? What if Jesus didn't even live? What if he was just something that someone made up and manufactured? What if our entire Bible is just a collection of cool pieces of history and sayings, and that's actually only just based on nothing but passed down tradition and fairy tales? Well, hey, if you missed last week's teaching where we explored the reliability of the Bible, I would just encourage you to go back and check that one out. It might give you some insight into this question. If you want to take a deep dive into whether or not Jesus actually lived, I'd encourage you to check out a book called The Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Strobel was a journalist who didn't believe in God, and he set out to prove that Jesus was in fact a legend. And as he examined and cross-examined experts in their field to prove this point, Strobel created this unbiased compilation of facts that totally and completely stunned himself. In the course of his research, he determined that the reality of Jesus is indisputable. Over the course of his research, Lee Strobel actually became a Jesus follower, and in his book, The Case for Christ, it's just all of his research notes put together. If you want to compare apples to apples, when you add up the evidence based on the writings of historical scholars like Tacitus and Josephus and Pliny the Younger, all of the New Testament writers and many others, like the pile of evidence that we have that Jesus lived would be bigger, taller, than the pile of evidence that we have of many other modern day people. I've heard it compared to Abraham Lincoln. Technically, we have more evidence to prove that Jesus lived than we do that Lincoln lived. So if Jesus wasn't a liar, he wasn't a lunatic, and we have evidence to prove that he wasn't a legend, that leaves us with the reality that he in fact is Lord. So let's take a second and let's circle back to the the question in Matthew chapter 16. It just says this, but what about you? What about you? Jesus asked, who do you say I am? And that's the real question, right? Who do you say that Jesus is? You get to choose. Peter answers Jesus' question and he says, you are the Messiah. You are the Son of the living God. And we could spend hours and hours just providing evidence that Jesus was real or that Jesus was in fact the living God. But the reality is it's never going to be enough if you don't want to believe. And I think that's the real heart of what we're getting at in this series. Like, what changes? What does it cost you to believe that Jesus was the Son of the living God? Because if he was, it changes everything. We need to take him seriously. We need to let him shape our lives. We need to let him guide us and have a voice into our hearts and our minds. We need to lean into him and trust him when we're confused or heartbroken. Over the next 2 weeks, we're going to continue to talk about the cost of our faith and why sometimes that's really the thing that keeps us from taking some steps forward. Hey, thanks so much for hanging out with us today. We'll catch you again right here next week.